Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Shop Talk, hosted by the Triangle Area SQL Server Users Group. So to close out 2023, one last episode of Shop Talk. Let me double check that because one last episode of Shop Talk. The next one is technically scheduled for New Year's Day. We'll see. We'll see. We may instead have Martin Luther King Day as the first episode of Shop Talk for 2024. I'll have to talk about that with the rest of the crew. But anyhow, speaking of the rest of the crew, 2023, bye-bye. Yeah. Over yonder, we've got Mike Christensen. How you doing, Mike?
Doing well, thanks. Hope everybody's doing well tonight.
Absolutely. And going roughly that direction, Mala. How you doing, Mala?
Good evening, everyone. Pleased to be here. Doing all right.
All right. So if this is your first time on Shop Talk, welcome. The idea here is a little water cooler chat after work. It's Monday. It's probably evening. At least it is here on the East Coast. Welcome in. We're going to talk a little bit about data platform stuff, SQL Server, Spark, fun stuff along the like. And got a couple of topics for this evening, but this is also chat driven. So if you have questions, drop them in, and we're here to provide answers that may or may not be correct and may or may not be entertaining, but there will hopefully be at least one of the two. So, for topics tonight, as far as topics tonight goes, Mike just hit me up with an interesting one that relates to learning about SQL. So, let me share my tab here, and it's the SQL murder mystery. So do you want to talk about this, or do you want me to wing it?
I can I can talk about a little bit. So the genesis of this was I work with a lot of clinicians, and some of them are informaticists. So they kind of have hybrid roles within the research community. And one of them expressed interest in learning SQL, and of course, they don't need to know it to the level that some of us do, but they need to know it to understand how to, work with colleagues, etc. So I had found some of these things over time, doing some research on, obviously, if you have an account at work, you need privileges, and you need to know what server you're on, and you need to know if you're using a service account or you're using your own account. All these things that are kind of the bread and butter of our group. But so I found some of these resources in which, like you can just do almost like glitch or fiddle or in this case JavaScript. We were talking about sql.js.org, where they have kind of like this JavaScript framework that helps serve SQL up in the browser. So it's just a neat way to like do something fun and actually learn a little bit about SQL without having to be like, the thing I was saying to Kevin was, even knowing the difference between developer, enterprise, Azure SQL versus SQL Server versus Oracle SQL. Like, obviously, if you're new, it's kind of overwhelming, all the things that are in our industry. So anyway, so these were really kind of neat, where it's kind of like supposed to be like a little bit fun because you're like solving a puzzle, but also like you don't need a stack. You just go right into the browser and do it.
Yeah, making it a lot easier for andragogical purposes, the process of helping adults learn. And it's a detective story, which usually is pretty interesting to people. You're trying to diagnose a crime, so we've got a crime scene report and can learn about things. Actually reminds me a lot of the Cousteau Detective Agency, which is a Microsoft website that is all about, very similarly, it's learning the Cousteau query language, KQL, although it tends to expect that you're already fairly proficient with KQL because it ramps up very quickly. But you basically have a story driven way of learning about how to do different things in KQL, or in this prior case, a story driven way of learning how do you use SQL. And apparently there is a walkthrough that will take you through it if you aren't that familiar with the structured query language. So link is in chat. Looks kind of fun. Check it out. And there are other websites along these lines that you can help learn a little bit of SQL from. I don't think it replaces, say, if you're learning T-SQL, Itzhak Ben-Ghan's book on beginning T-SQL, or
Oh no, I don't think. I think it's just basics.
yeah,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, like, how do you write a where clause, or how do you find a certain record in a table? What are the conditions you need to put? All that sort of stuff.
right. So it's not a whole picture of its own, but if you are learning about SQL, this is specifically SQLite, that variant of the SQL syntax. So certain concepts and terms will be slightly different than if you're using T-SQL or PLSQL or PSQL or MySQL's variant of the language, or basically any of the other variants of the language aside from SQLite. Nonetheless, you can probably get a lot out of it, so worth checking out. First time I've seen it, I haven't run through it myself, but it does look kind of intriguing, and who doesn't love a murder mystery? Speaking of murder mysteries, Eric Darling has had a great series of blog posts. And you might ask, where's the transition there? And I would say, well, the transition there is that I just opened up this new page. So Eric has been writing about stored procedures, the art of the SQL Server stored procedure. And so far he's gone through, about a half dozen or so topics on various parts of what it's like not only to write just a regular stored procedure, but if you think about maintaining a very large stored procedure, maintaining a whole process. Think of SP who is active, where Eric has been a contributor to that. SP Blitz, where he's been a maintainer for a while. SP All Night Log, or some of the other stuff that he's done. And actually, I can pull up Eric's GitHub profile and go into some of the stuff that he regularly works on. And then we'll get back to the ANSI and set statements. But yeah, he's got a series of different stored procedures, especially the ones that start with SP underscore, because he is a monster. But getting into things, pressure detection, making extended events human parsable, reading the system health event. So some interesting things that are quite helpful for end users, and trying to say, well, how do you make a stored procedure that is, in this case, this is only 680 lines, but some of these can be several thousand lines long. How do you make it understandable for people, maintainable for people, especially in an open source fashion? And I see I'm dropping frames left and right, so hopefully the connection isn't too bad. But unfortunately, it looks like it's going to be one of those nights. So bear with me, please, as I'm dropping frames like a bad waiter at a restaurant. Nonetheless, point I'm driving at here. How do you have, especially in an open source environment, how do you get a maintainable stored procedure? And Eric has started some articles advising us how you can do this. So a few things. The first one is on ANSI and set options. And these are things that we don't often really think too much about. So he's got a block of his recommended ANSI and set statements. And many of these are this way by default. They're just ANSI nulls is usually on by default. ANSI padding is usually on by default. But depending on your environment, somebody may have turned the thing off. So it's better in those situations to turn it off explicitly within the stored procedure, so that you're not in a weird situation where somebody else's instance has numeric round abort on by default because they either don't understand what it means or have some specific need for it in some other process. And you developed it without even knowing that that's an actual setting, and then end up having some weird edge case. So he mentions here many ORMs mess up with arithmetical operations aborting, and so you might have some settings that you would want to make explicit as you're going. Implicit transactions off. What do you think this is, Oracle? Actually, that would be the opposite joke because Oracle is explicit only, unless you explicitly make it implicit. So don't have implicit transaction. Just begin transaction, commit transaction, rollback transaction. It's 2 words. You don't even. Yeah, you kind of do need both words, but begin tran, commit, rollback. Yeah, it's maximum of 4 words. Not that tough. We can all do it. So there's plenty of advice in these articles. ANSI and set options is a pretty good one. I am going to spend a little bit more time here on this, how to leave good comments. So like I said, this is actually part of a series. So I'm going to do a quick recapitulation of some of the things that he has mentioned, while also recommending that you read the articles, because even in cases where I'm not 100% in agreement with Eric, he's pretty good about stuff. So like if you're looking for comments, all right, what is the purpose of a comment? What do you think, Mike Ramala? What is the purpose of a comment?
Just to tell you're doing it for other people in the future. You're like, this is what I was doing. This is what I was thinking.
To explain the business background behind whatever you're writing, or that's at least that's one reason.
Yeah.
One reason is the business background, or what led to you writing that piece of code. Second is if you are using some kind of construct that person may be wondering why you're using it, you may want to explain, like for example, a hint. Why have you put a hint in there for the query to perform better? What was the issue that caused you to do that? That sort of stuff. That's what I would look for in comments. Basically, the history of the code and also the reasons why somebody used a specific construct. And you don't need it for everything. Yeah, only if you're using something that may raise eyebrows and make the person wonder why this was used.
Yep, I definitely agree with those. Help future you or future maintainer understand the why. And why is usually, if you have a comment, it should be explaining why. Or how. Why or how. How, if it's particularly complicated. Like this is some weird stuff that I barely understand how it works, so I'd better comment it so that later on, when I've forgotten how it works, I can read it and try to remember. Why? For a couple of reasons. One is, like Mala said, business value. This is why we're doing it. It's the legal requirements are that we have to do this, or the business demands that we do it this way, or this non-obvious solution is because of this business mandate. The other side of it is that you also want to explain, hey, why did I write the query this way? Well, I tried 7 other ways to write it. None of them performed well. And so when someone comes in later and says, oh my gosh, look at how bad this query is, I'll bet you I could rewrite it, and they try one of the 7 ways that you did before and end up with performance problems, there's at least a comment in there that says, yeah, I had to use this weird construct because the normal solutions didn't work well. So that can potentially save a person in the future from wasting time on something that doesn't make any meaningful sense. Now, Eric does, and I'm pointing this out, this is one thing that I'm okay with when I'm pseudocoding. When I have a stored procedure and I say, all right, I need to write this procedure, it needs to get all of the error logs, then it needs to do this, then this, then this, and this. I'm fine with writing these sorts of comments, but I get rid of them as I write them. I don't think this style of comment adds a whole lot. If it were a more complex scenario, like if SP enum error logs were some completely different stored procedure and you're taking advantage of a weird side effect of it, then I think it's fair to leave a comment that explains what you're trying to do. But SP enum error logs, enumerate error logs, seems like it is a reasonably straightforward procedure that I don't think we need to say you get all of the error logs, because your insert statement is showing that you're getting all of the error logs and you're inserting them into enum. That's the kind of comment I'm usually not a big fan of. I much prefer, like you folks were saying, the why and the how. That's how I phrase it. But Eric does recommend use block quotes. By block quotes, what he means is the /*/ instead of hyphen for comment. And the reason for block quotes, so using this style of comment can mess things up, because if you're trying to run it on one line, well, as soon as you get to the first comment like this, you end up accidentally commenting out everything after that point. You can end up also having difficulty showing where the comment ends and the next bit of code begins. Again, usually when new lines are messed up in your query, when strings are not quite 100% right. So it is a solid idea to use block style commenting. I will admit that I use line style commenting probably more than I should, but this is a simple example where if you say, oh, oops, sorry, it popped open a new window. I was going through this so beautifully, and then I realized that none of you could see it. So line style comment, block style comment. Block style comment is a little bit better in, say, this scenario where you have this comment and star from sys.databases as D. This will actually work. It will give you select star from sys.databases as D. Select hyphen comment star from sys.databases as D. This comments out everything after it.
I like that example. That's good.
Yeah. And then when you're dealing with things like ORMs, when you're dealing with systems where you're piecing together strings to generate a query and then sending that finalized query to the database, that can end up being a painful outcome if you accidentally comment out some code that you didn't intend to.
This is just a side note. It's also kind of more common in other languages, the block comment.
C-style languages, yes. So
yes, I've been learning C, and I mean, learning is a stretch. But yeah, I was kind of like, oh, okay. Well, some other languages do this too.
Yep. That C-style, C, C++, C#, Java. Now you get into other languages, and you think of Python, where they have just the hash as a comment. So there is no block. There is no block comment in Python. It is all just hashes. Other languages like R will have similar style of commenting where you can do both. You can both have a line comment and a block comment.
And ours is C under the hood, right?
Yeah, C++ is the language that's used for some of the underlying operations. I think C is used for some of it. Similarly with Python, there's a lot of C or C++ underpinning where you get to things like Python. So some of the more complicated, more expensive actions, they'll rewrite as C or C++ code to make it faster. The third one, I'm not going to dive in too much. We've spent a lot of time on Shop Talk talking about formatting code, getting into some of the holy wars. and there's probably a lot of comments. There are 40 comments on here. This is clickbait. Um, so Eric's got opinions. I'm 60% in agreement. I do prefer tabs. I do hate leading commas, so I agree. I do hate all lowercase and all uppercase. Make it correct case. Not putting new things on new lines. Yeah, I agree. Not indenting things. I agree. By the way, these are bad things. These are things Eric doesn't want to see. Table aliases, I don't think should need an as. I don't like that as in table aliases. Column aliases, yes. Leaving out column aliases, that's also bad. Top expressions without parentheses, right? That's technically a violation of the SQL standard, or the T-SQL
I only
standard, I
use
should
offset
say.
fetch. I never do it. I only use offset fetch. Never do it.
You only use offset fetch and never what?
I never use top. Never.
Really? You never do like select top 10 star from table?
No, never.
Really, Mike?
Never,
Really?
because it's non-ANSI, and ICSIC told me not to.
It
That
is
was in one of his books.
okay. It is not ANSI.
Why
and-
did he say not to? Did he have any?
Non-ANSI.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize it discouraged people from using things that just
I might
because
be
it's
I
not
might be
ANSI.
overstating
Yeah.
the case, but he had suggested that offset fetch is, multi dialect, whereas top is not. And I got so used to using it in Oracle that I just use it constantly. I just order by select null.
It's weird that in Oracle you wouldn't just do limit instead of offset fetch.
It is, but I started doing it when I joined this group in 2018, and I learned that it was ANSI standard, and I just only do that now. That's all I do.
Okay. I mean, that's fair. And for these sorts of scenarios, there may be cases where offset fetch doesn't perform as well as top. I'd have to try it out, see if I could gen up an example. But yeah, okay, that's fair. Not aligning parentheses. I agree. Align those parentheses.
I literally have a hotkey for it.
That's smart. That's smart. So basically, Eric's got opinions. I'm not going to harp on those opinions. I agree with many of them. I disagree with some of them. Moral of the story for companies: figure out what works well for your team and adopt a common pattern. If your common pattern looks exactly like what Eric has, great. If it doesn't look exactly like what Eric has, that's also fine. As long as it works for your team. And if you're going to contribute to one of Eric's stored procedures, then, well, you've got a feeling of what you're going to have to, the structure you're going to have to abide by. And I think that's fair. If you're the lead maintainer of a stored procedure, yeah, you get to call some of this stuff on formatting for an open source project. Or if you're the data architect at a company, yeah, you're going to have a lot of heavy weight in terms of how formatting occurs. So next one I want to talk about is error handling. This one I think is a little more interesting, mostly because it's not as much holy war. So unlike 40 comments, we get one, which is curated SQL. So that was me linking to it. Error handling. So Erland has a really good article on error handling and transaction handling in SQL. It's part of it's one of the essays that he has written, and it's actually, I think it was part one of a 3-part series. So let me see if I can pull that up right now. So yeah, this is Jumpstart error handling. Erland has basically, he just puts it up a web page and doesn't care about blogging. But this is a really good mechanism for learning how to handle errors. I know Solomon, I don't know if Solomon's in chat, but Solomon has also written, yep, Solomon may be here. He's also written a lot on error handling, as I recall. So, good things to read up on. As far as error handling goes, let me walk through the part that Eric talks about here and say, okay, try to figure out what it is that you're expecting to do with errors and conditions. So are you just printing out information? Are you logging it and stopping everything? Are you going to raise an error, log it, and just keep going? Or try to retry something or try a different way? And if you're not going to do one of those things, then what's the point of error handling? So don't collect errors just to collect them. Make sure that you understand what to do with them. And this is one of those things that can get difficult when you're talking about architecture. And that is, at what level do you want to capture errors, and at what level do you want to allow errors to bubble back up? So in the database, I might want to capture an error if I know how to solve it. If there's some issue that I can automatically resolve, cool, let me fix that. If I don't know how to resolve it, I should allow that error to just throw to the next level. Because the next level, which is whatever calling application, hopefully has some way of catching an error. And there's probably more intent of what was the end user intending, and how would they like errors to be handled, how would they like conduct to occur, than in the database, where we have to be more generic than an application. So basically, if you don't know what you're going to do with that error, let it go to the next level. Now, if you're at the top level and you still don't know what you're going to do with that error, that is a problem. Someone somewhere has got to figure out how to handle that error. And so that's why it's not just as simple as, oh, it's database, let all the errors bubble up. I think there are meaningful things that you can do, especially around logging, because you can't always trust that the next level's logging will collect enough information to diagnose the problem and allow developers to resolve it. Okay. All right, Solomon. I thought you had written something about error handling. Maybe it was another one of Erlen's posts that you had a much more detailed response to. But that's fair. So here's a scenario. All right, you have a stored procedure that accepts start date and end date parameters. What do you want to do if somebody passes in a start date that's after the end date? And there are a few outcomes. You could throw an error, call someone a bonehead. You could be nice and swap them around. You could be psychic and change them to the dates they probably meant. You can add or subtract time from one or both of the parameters. And I mean, Eric does ask, hey, if this is coming from a front-end app, why do you wait until the query gets to the SQL Server to figure out that the start date is after the end date? The application should tell you that. Yes, but. Yes, the application server can tell you that. Yes, the application can tell you that. But apparently the application didn't tell you that because, hey, app devs make mistakes too. So this is where I like having defense in depth when it comes to error handling. I want to make sure that, especially for something that's cheap, figuring out about start date and end date input parameters, that's a cheap operation. Unless I'm running this query billions and billions of times and I need to optimize microseconds, I'm going to make that check. And then the question does become, what do you do with that information? If you find out that start date is after end date, what do you do? I don't think swapping them is the right answer. I think that's how you fix a problem in code the wrong way, by introducing two problems. Throwing an error could be acceptable. logging that information could be acceptable. Changing the date, maybe. I'd be hesitant about changing those inputs. And Mike, you're shaking your head no. You don't want
I'd
to.
be hesitant to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, because again, it feels like what you're trying to do is resolve an error by compounding it in a way that hopefully reverses it. And when instead you should just be resolving the error at a higher level. So log, yes. Throw an error, yeah, I could actually see that being perfectly reasonable. Hey, application failed by sending in invalid date inputs. Please make sure your start date comes before your end date. We're not Merlin. We don't age backwards. So yes, the front end application absolutely should fix it. That UI should not allow the situation where a start date can be after an end date. But we all know UIs get things wrong, developers get things wrong, and I think just because it should be handled upstream doesn't mean we can't also handle it downstream or shouldn't also handle it downstream. But still, worth thinking about. And yeah, there may be times when you want to halt a stored procedure. And at that point, we say, all right, let's figure out what we want to do. How do we want to do this? If you do set transact abort on, then you can roll it back. You can kill the transaction, and everything goes back to status quo ante. If you want to try to log and swallow transient errors, yeah, you could have an empty try catch block. And also, if you know that there's a specific type of error that doesn't matter. So, for example, let's say you have an insert into a table and you have a primary key that is not an identity integer. Let's say that it's just some value, and that value represents maybe like, this is a customer ID that I want to reprocess. Well, let's make this a queue table. So you have a queue table, you've got a list of customer IDs that you want to reprocess, and you insert into that table. And if customer ID 12 is already in that table and you try to insert 12 again, yeah, you're going to get an error. But does it actually matter? The answer is no, because you were going to reprocess 12 anyhow. So don't throw an error on that. Just say, okay, well, 12 was already handled, so we don't have to handle it. You could be smarter in your application to see which things are already in the list, but in case there's some sort of failure like that, just let life go. There was a case on dba.stack exchange asking about in what cases can a transaction be committed from inside the catch block when transact abort is on, which I am opposed to while Erland is in favor of. All right, I got to pull this up. So, the long part. All right, we know who wrote this one. So yeah, this is something that I'll have to read up on a bit later. But hey, Remus is in there as well. But looks like there's some discussion in here as well, and worth an investigation. May have written too long of an answer. It's fine. It's fine. Just have to nothing I can fake on the air and pretend that I am definitely conversant. So I'm opposed to setting transact abort on unless absolutely necessary, which I believe is really only with distributed transactions or linked servers. I think that's reasonable. And yeah, when you are working with linked servers, things do get wonky. Wonky is a fair term for it. But for setting transact abort on, yeah, because you should be controlling how many transactions deep you are, and you shouldn't have nested transactions to begin with. You shouldn't have to worry so much about the transaction scope and having that any weird situations. So I could see that not being that important for regular SQL processing. Retry. One of the interesting things that Eric mentions in here is actually retry is typically something you want to do better in application code. And if your stored procedure, though, if it's not called by an application, you may want to do retry within your SQL query. So this may be where you have an outer stored procedure that calls an inner procedure, and sometimes you get deadlocks, but you can just retry after those deadlocks. Then you could have a catch, and you can catch on specific errors. So I catch on the error code for deadlock, and if I get that, okay, just rerun the stored procedure. And if I fail X number of times, then, well, we return back. We couldn't do it because we've got so many deadlocks going on. So Erlen's argument is there are a few cases that can't be caught with try-catch. My view is such problems should be found in testing. Erlen is right. There are things that you can't get in a try-catch block, and some of them are annoying that you can't catch them. Some of them are disaster level, so they're like database does not exist type of operation. Object does not exist, if I remember right, is I don't think you can catch that. But there were some cases where I remember you could not catch them, and it felt like I understood why they weren't catchable, but from the standpoint of writing good defensive code, it was really frustrating because you want to catch this thing and you can't because the construct doesn't allow it. But yeah, you should hopefully find those problems in testing, and I suppose you can argue that set transact abort on is the lazy way out, or the we didn't test this through way out. But even then, if you have an explicit transaction, you have such a catastrophic error that either the session closes or you get a hard error. Well, if you get a hard error and the session doesn't close, then you would, I think, need to roll back if you don't have transact abort on. So you could be in a weird situation until that ends. For applications, once that connection closes, then you would have the end result. But yeah, it's tricky. It's tricky. I'll have to read your 2 points and point and counterpoint and think about it some more. The argument's so difficult, I'm starting to get allergies. And not everything requires error handling. So there are some cases like I mentioned, self-healing. So he calls it self-healing, but basically if you already know what the answer is, like I'm inserting into a Q table and that record is already there, well, I don't need to insert into the Q table again. I can just let that go. Or I receive an error and I know that the fix to this error is to find the next largest number and insert into there, or insert that number. In that case, you could fix it yourself, but it can be complicated. So not always something you can pull off. After error handling, we have debugging. And this is not about using the SQL Server debugger. Although, I have to say, I am shocked and amazed how many people use the SQL Server Management Studio debugger. Knowing how bad that thing is, there were riots when the SSMS team pulled it out of Management Studio. And I was looking at this and saying, yeah, that's not a smart thing to use to begin with. And yet a whole lot of people used it. So many so that I think I know that there have been plenty of cases. Hey, bring this back, put the debugger back in, and I don't think it's a wise move. debugging stored procedures, like having a breakpoint in the middle of a stored procedure, especially on a production server or even a development server that has multiple users, not great. This is not a stateless application where you can stop in the middle, go grab a cup of coffee, and everything's fine. This is a stateful database, and especially in a multi-user environment, your debugging could hold everybody up and cause major problems on accident. So there is absolutely an observer effect with debugging in SQL Server. But Eric's not talking about that. He's talking more about message logging and reading through the outputs in a stored procedure to understand what's going on and why you may have some weird outcome. So figure out, hey, if you're debugging, then when you enter a certain section, you can say raise error with no wait. And if you raise an error with a low enough priority level, 10 or below, then it will not be considered an official error. So usually I do 10 for raise error, the level of it, but it will not be considered an error in the sense of, oh, we need to stop anything. It will be considered informational. And if you say with no wait, you don't have this going into the buffer so that it eventually comes out. What happens if you just have a print statement or a raise error without no wait or with wait is that it can go into a buffer while other operations are happening, and you may be sitting there spinning because you're in a process and the buffer just hasn't flushed yet. So you might be halfway through a process and not realize that you're there because your buffer hasn't flushed to write those messages out to output. So using with no wait basically says, I don't want you to hold this back in a buffer while you're doing other work. I want you to just output that message right now. And the %d here is after your two variables for raise error. You can have strings or numbers. You can't have a date, as I recall. I forget if you can have binary, but you can definitely have strings and numbers. And you could print those out in your raise error. So I love to do this when I'm doing batch updates, updating 1,000 rows at a time or 10,000 rows at a time, and I've got 100 million rows to do. I love having a raise error that says, hey, I finished up this many rows, where I get the number based off of the number that I completed. And that way, I'm able to see 1,000 rows, 1,000 rows, 1,000 rows, 276 rows. All right, now I know I'm done. So very helpful. Eric's got a video on it. We're not going to show the video, but definitely something that it takes a bit of time figuring out how do we do it right? How do we, at what level do we want to track this information for debugging purposes? And having this debug flag where it's an input, I'm not sure if it's guaranteed to skip the buffer. Someone recently, they tested an even raise error with no wait was delayed in certain situations. I'd be curious what those situations were, because at least for most circumstances, I think maybe all the circumstances I've dealt with, I've never had a wait. I imagine it probably is still technically buffered, that there's just a buffering mechanism. And the question is, how quickly or to what level of priority does this thing get written out? So I suppose there could be something that was even more critical than the write with no wait. That, you get far enough into the depths of the SQL Server code base, and there's probably something in there. But I don't know that I've run into that before. Still, kind of interesting. So even if it says, okay, it's not guaranteed to skip the buffer or not guaranteed to write out immediately, this is the way of making it very likely that it writes out immediately. And it takes a little bit more effort thinking about, because print is just really easy. Print, whatever. So easy to think about that. Raise error, the fact that there's only one E instead of two E's, and it's not incredibly intuitive. Huh. They were asking me if SQL CLR could 100% bypass the buffer because they ran into that case. Okay. That is interesting. I imagine it probably is a weird edge case, but definitely interesting. But speaking of updates, Eric does have a post on batching modifications and links to Michael J. Swartz' really good post on making those sorts of updates. So let me pop up Michael's post first. This is from a decade ago, but kind of talking about long-running modifications and batching. So why use batching? It has a quick example of different types of batches. Naive batching actually works surprisingly often. He mentioned that it does poorly. Yes, it does poorly if you don't have this customer key. So if you do have the customer key set up appropriately, then it can be better. But he does have the better batching example. So using the online sales key and the customer key, basically saying if you are not having to scan through more and more of the index to find where those customer records are. Again, a lot of this is based on indexing, and you can see how long does it take in terms of logical reads for batch delete. The green, so the increasing bar, the green bar is the naive batching approach. The red bar is the careful batching approach, and you get this feeling of that if you do search by keys and you have the appropriate indexes, then you can get much better performance in terms of batch deletes or batch updates. Eric also mentions in here a couple of the other things around basically using the output clause to avoid having to do multiple operations. So I am a huge fan of the output clause. It's something I think that T-SQL developers tend to underutilize, and outside of T-SQL, it's I don't think it's ANSI standard, and so you tend not to see people using output deleted or there we go output deleted or inserted records. And if you do an update, you actually get two sets. You get the deleted set and you get the inserted set. Inserted set for an update is the original. Or no, sorry. Deleted is the original. Inserted is the new. So kind of gives you that feeling of what was that data before, what had that data become, which is quite useful for logging. So you perform an update, you can output the logs to another table and have like that homegrown temporal table or homegrown slowly changing dimension. Next article, just a couple more, but yeah, I do want to call all these out because I think Eric has done a great job so far in this series. Transactions. So this one I'm not going to spend too much time on. I will recommend go read it. But talking about, hey, what happens if we're running this type of a query in read committed and pessimistic isolation level? So we're in a transaction, we have a select operation, and we have an update operation. And then what happens if we're in read committed? Well, basically, what's wrong with this code? We only get the first user whose data was currently committed in the users table and who has a question in the post table. Then we try to update a row and post for that user. But what happens if the user deletes their profile after we find them, or someone votes on a question after we find them, or they delete their question after we find them? So read committed is not a consistent snapshot of the data. In a highly transactional environment where we're looking at the posts table here, but we're looking at the users and posts table here, basically something could have changed in between these operations that modifies, like where some operation happens within the posts table that modifies what the correct result should be in the users table. And you may need to do something a little bit more sophisticated. In here, we have another example. By the way, if you want to avoid these changes, you could add update lock or serializable to the select query and the exists subquery, and that'll prevent changes until the update completes. Well, that's going to cause more blocking. So, realize what's going to happen is while that's running, it will block other users from reading the users or posts tables and doing much with them. They could read, but they couldn't modify. So that is something to keep in mind along the way, that using update lock as an index hint or changing serializable will lock that table while you're using it. And for this other scenario, the idea is to insert any new users into the high question scores table. So what we're looking is insert into high question scores. We're getting from users. We're finding the highest score in their posts. And we also want to see they don't have a high question score already. So it's somebody who's brand new to the high question scores group. And we want to insert into there. Then we want to update high question scores, set the last question badge equal the name of, from high question scores, we're going to find badges where the name is like question. And we'll get the top one ordered by the date. So we'll get the latest badge question. Latest question badge. And then we commit. So there's no reason to roll back new users inserted in the table if the update query fails for some reason. So what Eric is arguing is these two operations, this insert and this update, there's no reason why they have to be separate, or why they can't be separate transactions, why they have to be conjoined together. We can insert the new high score users and then update the last questions on existing high score users. And if this one succeeds and this one fails, we're not in a weird, incorrect state because they're not really dependent on each other. What we're in is a state where we succeeded on one, but we failed on the next. It'd be like if we had two separate stored procedures, one succeeded, one failed. That doesn't leave our data in an inconsistent state. And so if you don't have a problem from consistency, then it's better to close off this transaction here and then begin a new transaction and close it off here. So that's Eric's argument. So transactions should only encapsulate queries where correctness would be affected by one failing. That's an A affected. And the last one that he has so far in the series, there may have been a post today, but locking hints. This one's a little bit shorter, but basically they're normally in awful products. Like, this is probably not the best way to do things. So if you're going to use them, understand that it's probably a bad idea unless you're using the merge operator. If you're using the merge operator, then you probably do want to use update lock and serializable, because that's going to prevent weird accessibility issues while you're performing the various steps of the merge operation. So in this case, this is not a merge statement, but is also like what we talked about before, where, hey, we can use update lock and serializable to block any updates to the users table until we have inserted into the badges table. And that's all I've got here for Eric's posts. Really good series. I think that there are several more that are coming up in the series, and I'm looking forward to them. But last thing that I want to do, because this is a naturally contemplative time of the year. Actually, no, second to last thing. The second to last thing that I want to do is make note, in case anybody is planning to attend the main meeting tomorrow. I sent out an email today to registrants. We will not be able to do that one in person. Our hosts at Tech Systems are moving to a new office, so we are going to have our first in-person main meeting in January. So that will be in person, not hybrid. It will actually just be only in person for January through at least April. So we're going to try out several months of in-person only for that main meeting. The advanced DBA and the data science and business intelligence meetings will remain online only. And we'll see how turnout is affected. And if we start getting significant turnout during those in-person only meetings, then I'll try to bring it back to hybrid. But the goal is to nudge people who are in the area. If you can attend, we'd love to have you attend. So that was the second to last thing. The last thing is a little closing out the year. And this is an impromptu look at some of the stuff that we've done through the year. How have we done at TriPass over the course of the year? And also interested in hearing from chat. Normally I send out, every couple of years, I send out a survey of TriPass attendees and say, hey, what have you liked about the group? What do you want to see improve in the group? What kinds of sessions do you want to see? Where is Tech Systems moving to? That's a good question. I'll find out in January. I think they're still in the same area. They're just in a different building. So they're not too far away from what I understand. It's still kind of in that NC State area. But I don't know the exact address yet. We'll have that updated before the January main meeting, and I'll make sure that it's on the invitation correctly. So in 2023, we had a lot of sessions. Obviously, had our advanced DBA, our main meeting, our business intelligence data science group. All three of those have been going on for several years. We haven't seen much change in that. We have talked a bit internally about opening up, instead of advanced DBA, just say advanced topics, and have more of a broader based kind of 300 to 400 level sessions, as opposed to trying to hone in on that DBA subset. So we are still talking about that. It's not official, but it's, probably going to happen. We had our first hybrid meetings this year, our first since 2019, early 2020. So those had some trouble getting people in. We had one down at the library near my house. Thomas Grosser came in, and there were three of us. So that was cool, including Thomas. It made three. But a little bit slow on uptake. We're looking at mechanisms for that, hopefully to bring some people back out. Had a lot going on in terms of quality of speaker. We've had some really good speakers. We had a surprising number of Germans. Surprising because they had to present at midnight or 1 a.m. their time. So certainly have appreciated them staying up late for us. And I know 2024, our Sessionize call for speakers is out. In case you have not seen it, let me quickly log in to Sessionize and grab that link for you, because call for speakers is open. We would love to have you, especially if you are someone closer to the area and would be interested in an in-person meeting. We've got slots for the main meeting, especially later in the year. But if you're not in the area, submit for any of the sessions. So advanced DBA, main meeting, or data science and business intelligence. Still have some openings. I know that not all of the dates that are on the list are currently open, but Tracy does a pretty good job of keeping those up to date. So gives you a rough idea of what's going on. Second Tuesday of the month, advanced topics. Third Tuesday, main meeting. Fourth Tuesday, data science, business intelligence. Certainly interested in taking those submissions and getting some talks out of people. Anything you wanted to add to that, Mala or Mike?
No, you said that very well.
No. Also, somebody asked me this, so I wanted to clarify. We are basically, we like SQL Server based topics, but if you have, if you want to present something interesting on any other data platform, we will hear you. We will definitely hear you if you want to do that. So it's not like, SQL Server or nothing kind of a thing. Not at all. So I just wanted to throw that out there in case anyone was interested.
Yeah, this is true. We've had Kellen Gorman talking about Oracle indexing. We've had a few topics that are outside the normal Microsoft data platform space. I've given sessions on Spark and Hadoop. So yeah, there's scope for broader data platform. The majority of our sessions are going to be Microsoft data platform related, and that's kind of just the nature of the group. But there is certainly the ability to have sessions that are on something else. Like if someone has a really good DuckDB talk, that might actually be a good topic, especially for data science, business intelligence, given how popular DuckDB has become. So, yeah, we're certainly open to that. But all right, I think we've just about done it. We're a couple minutes over, but that's okay because it's the end of the year. I think we can be over one day. But I think we're going to wrap things up for now. So we'll have to debate internally whether or not there's going to be a shop talk on January 1st. If there is, we'll hopefully see you then. If not, we'll see you hopefully January 15th. And regardless, remember tomorrow, main meeting, virtual only, but you'll be able to find it here. It'll start 6:30 p.m. Eastern time. So we hope to see you there. And regardless of when we do see each other next, until then, take care.
Bye.